Well, welcome everyone to our webinar today on nurturing healthy aging, dairy's role in eating patterns. We're so glad that you're able to join us today. Before we get started, you can advance the slide. I'm just going to go over a few quick housekeeping notes so that our session runs smoothly. So today our session is going to be recorded. The recording will be shared with participants after the webinar as well as the presentation slides. To minimize background noise, all attendees are muted during the presentation. But if you have any questions at any time, please enter them into the Q&A section rather than in the chat, and we can address as many of those questions during the Q&A portion at the end. And then lastly, we just encourage you to all stay engaged. We have a few polls throughout the session, so we can have some fun and be active in the learning experience. So with that, I'll introduce the speakers. My name is Bessie O'Connor. I'm a registered dietitian and a project manager with Dairy Council of California. And I'm very passionate about what we do, collaborating and advocating for access to nutritious foods and access to nutrition education across the lifespan. And in the spirit of collaboration, today I will be co-speaking with Anjali Patel. She has a master's in public health and she's a registered dietitian as well. She's a community nutrition educator at San Diego Community College of Continuing Education, and she specializes in older adult education. She uses a diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging lens to support positive relationships with food, while also honoring cultural foodways and enhancing social connection. Our next co-speaker is Roberto Couto. He is also a registered dietitian, and he is dedicated to improving health and well-being for older adults. He's a first-generation graduate from California's Central Valley, and his work focuses on advancing nutrition and healthy aging, including the role of the Mediterranean diet in supporting wellness in older communities. So we're going to kick off with a poll just to kind of gauge level of understanding of nutrition topics related to older adults. So hopefully you see the poll pop up. So we have answers coming through. All right, you can go ahead and share the results. So it looks like we have some that have a good understanding of nutrition topics related to older adults and dairy nutrition, but a lot of neutral. So hopefully there will be some good information. Even people that have a good understanding will hopefully learn something new. All right, so today our objectives, and we're going to identify dairy's role in supporting gut, brain, bone, and muscle health. We're going to describe how a food-forward approach can support healthy aging. And then we're going to apply principles of connection and belonging and cultural relevance to enhance the impact of food and nutrition for older adults. So why is this so important? There we go. So in California, the over 60 population is expected to grow faster than any other age group. By 2030, older adults will make up a quarter of the state's population. And as this population grows, it is also becoming more diverse. So it's reflecting a wider range of racial, ethnic, and cultural backgrounds. As this number and diversity of older adults increases, there's going to be a need for resources and services that support this life stage, and access to nutritious foods and nutrition education will be an important part of that. So we're going to do another poll. So what is one of the top 10 health interests of adults? So we have healthy aging, energy, less fatigue, weight loss, gut health, or all of the above. All right, you can go ahead and share the results. So it looks like we have 14% say healthy aging, 4% say energy and less fatigue, and 4% say weight loss, and 7% say gut health, and majority say all of the above. And the answer is all of the above. I'm going to go to the next slide so that I can speak to this a little bit more. So on the screen, you can see that the top health benefits, what the top health benefits that adults are looking for. And this information comes from an International Food Information Survey of 3,000 Americans between the ages of 18 and 80. So many adults report healthy aging as one of their top main goals, along with weight management, energy, less fatigue, gut health, heart health, supporting muscle and brain function. And I found these findings really interesting because it kind of shows that people are starting to be more interested in complex health topics, and different functional health topics. And these are areas where nutrition plays a key role. So here on the chart, you can see that it's showing the average daily intake of different foods compared to what's recommended for men and women ages 60 and older. So it's kind of small and hard to see, but you can notice that the purple dots fall below the turquoise ovals, which are the recommended servings for the different food groups. So here you can see that total vegetable, fruit, and dairy fall below the recommendations. And overall, older adults score 63 out of 100 on the healthy eating index score. So you can see there's definitely room for improvement here. And then on the right-hand side of the screen, according to the Dietary Guidelines for Americans, key nutrients of concerns for older adults are calcium, potassium, vitamin D, and dietary fiber, all of which tend to be underconsumed in our American diet. And then protein and vitamin B12 are also special considerations for older adults, which we'll talk a little bit more as we go through the presentation. The nutrients highlighted in orange are ones that dairy foods provide a good or excellent source of, showing how dairy can really help close some of those nutrient gaps that we see. So we know that there's a lot of opportunity for improvement, but we also know that there's challenges and barriers for improving eating patterns. So I'm going to hand it over to Anjali to talk about some of these barriers.
That's right, Bessie. And so when we're talking about current dietary intake and how maybe perhaps we're falling a little bit short at the population level, we do need to address or at least have a conversation around what are the barriers, perceived and real barriers to intake. And so in addition to the social determinants of health, being economic stability and your built environment, whether you have access and availability, these are some barriers that I've heard directly from my students in my classes, from older adults. I've heard, so this is from sort of an educator, practitioner perspective, that lactose intolerance can be a barrier and an issue, a milk allergy, definitely. And we'll be addressing some of that a little bit later in our webinar. And also taste preferences can be a barrier. Sometimes you like food or certain foods, and sometimes you just can't, you don't have a palate for those foods. And dairy is one of those considerations to be made for taste. The cost of dairy and affordability is a factor and can be seen as a barrier, especially recently with food costs going up and being a little bit unstable. But having said that, least cost sources of calcium and vitamin D in the U.S. diet do include dairy, as it ranks high among high value foods on the nutrient per dollar index. So some of the myths that come along with the cost and affordability, we can help with tackling that. One of the other barriers can be values and core beliefs. And so on the slide, you can see the iceberg theory showing a relationship between your values and your perceptions, attitudes, and beliefs underneath that iceberg, and how that can feed into behaviors. And so part of this discussion, we'll be talking about kind of digging underneath that iceberg to see what drives human behavior around dairy intake. I'd like to also point out that the words in orange are also facilitators. So some of these can be also seen as opportunities for dairy intake, including taste, and values and core beliefs can help empower those to continue to consume dairy, even when there is some misinformation and some myths around dairy. So that definitely can be a barrier, misinformation and myths. Concerns about health effects of dairy products can be that barrier. They can include concerns about maybe this fat content, the use of antibiotics or hormones in dairy production. Inflammation has been linked or has been associated with dairy. Is that perhaps can we help kind of overcome some of those some of that misinformation and myths around dairy? And the general lack of information is also a barrier, but we can help educate in and around that. What I do often in my classes is work on helping students with their relationship with food and different food groups, especially if they've heard something that is negatively impacting their intake. So helping their relationship with food to protect themselves from like feeling that shame or guilt or fear or even stigma from eating certain foods can have a huge impact on how they on their intake. And so those are some of the ways in which we can help with the all that misinformation that's going around right now. Okay, so next slide. And understanding too how behavior change happens. Humanizing our approaches. Again, this is sort of a thread and a theme throughout our presentation, but understanding self-determination theory and how we can foster and help with behavior change. And so I bring up one theory. There are many out there, but self-determination is something that I work on in my class every day with my students, so that we can address some of those barriers and facilitators to intake. So we can ground our education and our work in this theory where, adults want to feel, and I would expand that to people, want to feel that they have autonomy, that feeling that they have a choice and they're willing to, move forward in their behavior because they have that choice. Competence is the number two in this theory. The experience of mastery and being effective in one's activity. So I run a community kitchen every week with my older adults to build that competence. And then relatedness, the need to feel connected and that belonging with others. Again, the community kitchen brings people together. They feel food is very much connected to their identities, and in sharing that space, we hit that relatedness to complete the self-determination theory of all three feeding into motivation. The bullet points are on how we sustain that behavior change, because it's one thing to have the behavior change, and then it's another thing to sustain it. This is from Dr. Maya Shankar's work. She's a cognitive scientist, and she speaks to how we can shape our goals to be more long-term. So once we establish a behavior, how can we sustain it? One of the things she talks about is goal framing, approaching versus avoidance. So instead of saying, I will not eat this, which is avoidance and restrictive, we change the mindset to, I will include that. So I will include a cup of yogurt per day instead of I will not eat saturated fat. It's not as approachable and it's not as sustainable. So we want to we want to frame the goal so that it feels good to us and it matches our values. Goal setting is definitely part of keeping the SMART goal setting, I should say. So specific, measurable, realistic, achievable, and timely. So that can help with keeping that long-term goal. Agency just really speaks to autonomy, and having that goal be yours and matching your values. So, someone telling you you must lose weight is much more likely to be sustainable as you feeling like, oh, I want to be stronger. I want to gain muscle. Again, approaching like-minded, being around like-minded people with shared values, feeling that connection and that belonging. I see it every week in my kitchen. That's related to the relatedness and the motivation. Being around people that you can talk about your values with, or actually, and even if you're not talking about your values, you're just existing with them, can really help with continuing on your goals for long term. Building energy reserves into the goal setting, that just means that we're cutting ourselves some slack. So we're not, thinking, oh, we're going to do this every day, all day, or 7 days a week, but we, maybe 80% of the time, and we cut ourselves slack for the 20% time that, we're not feeling motivated, and cutting ourselves slack. We don't get into that mindset of I failed. And then capitalizing on fresh starts, New Year's, birthdays, seasonally every 3 months, anything that kind of helps you get back into a routine that feels comfortable for you. Mindful of goal duration just means that we have a middle problem where if the goal is for a whole year, we kind of fall off in the middle. And so if you make the goal duration like 2 weeks, then we have less of a middle problem of falling off. So you want to make the goal, shorter so that you don't have this middle problem where you're falling off and then it's harder to get back on. So so maybe your fresh starts are every month versus New Year's Day. Temptation bundling is just when you pair one activity with another that you enjoy. So say you don't enjoy this one, maybe not related to dairy, but or consumption of foods, but maybe I'm going to speak outside of that. Like I don't like doing laundry, for example. So what I temptation bundle with a podcast or some music. And so that helps me, and I only do it then, so I don't fatigue the activity that I really enjoy. But I pair those two activities to get it done. So not food related, but temptation bundling can really help with sustaining your goals and maintaining that for yourself. So, once you have a sort of a mindset, and we work on this a lot in my classes, then we move into more of, okay, let's look at entering into a food forward approach on how and building those into our strategies on dietary intake. So next slide, please.
Thank you for that, Anjali. It kind of just really helps frame, like, as we're going to talk about, improving dietary patterns and eating habits, just kind of keeping that in mind as that additive approach is great. So like thinking about these barriers as we think about a food forward approach, a focus on food as that foundation for health can, provide a very promising path forward to better health outcomes. Next slide. So this is a really exciting part. This is kind of we're going to dive in a little bit of nutrition science. And so thinking about this food forward approach, currently, nutrients are the most commonly recognized food components that impact health. But research is starting to really uncover that those nutrients, it's dependent on the food matrix in which they are contained and they're delivered, and this impacts how they're absorbed and used in the body. So for example, research has shown that calcium supplementation may increase coronary artery disease. However, calcium from food does not. So this just kind of shows that certain nutrients are consumed within the context of a food matrix may offer a more protection against disease than when they're not contained in that matrix. And although supplementation may be necessary or recommended in some situations, it does not replace the value of consuming whole nutrient-dense foods. So this idea of a food matrix is an emerging concept, and it just really helps explain how these food matrices consist of network of components with different physical structures. So we're thinking about foods that could be a liquid structure, it could be a gel structure, it could be solid, it could be pureed, maybe when we're blending food. All of that has an impact on how its food is absorbed in the body. Next slide. So looking specifically at the dairy matrix, it is comprised of proteins, carbohydrates, fats. It provides an excellent source, or good and excellent source of 13 different essential nutrients. But also there's vitamins and minerals that are at lower levels, but are still part of the components of the matrix. It also contains bioactives that may not provide nutritional value or impact on health, but they contribute to the dynamic structure of milk and other dairy foods. So the dairy matrix helps explain why dairy foods have health benefits beyond their isolated nutrients. So we talk about those 13 essential nutrients, but it's really that delivery system that helps explain the many health benefits of dairy foods. So for example, dairy foods are known for containing saturated fat. It's a fat type that has also been associated with raising cholesterol and risk for heart disease. However, dairy foods are not associated with increased risk of heart disease. And they contain over 400 different types of fatty acids, not just saturated fatty acids. So nutrition science is really starting to uncover how all these different components work together to have a positive impact on health. So when we think of milk through this matrix idea, it becomes clear why milk can be an excellent hydrating beverage, just as an example. So on the last slide, we saw that milk is 87% water, and it naturally contains electrolytes like potassium and magnesium, which help the body maintain fluid balance. And so unlike water alone, milk provides hydration and essential nutrients. It has high quality protein for muscle maintenance, calcium, vitamin D, potassium, and B vitamins for bone and overall health. And research shows that milk has a high hydration index, so it helps the body retain fluid longer than water or some sports drinks because of this combination of electrolytes and protein. And this is really important because dehydration is common among older adults due to reduced thirst sensation or changes in kidney function, or maybe different medications that the individual may be on. And even mild dehydration can affect cognition and mood. And I've talked to some health providers that say that oftentimes they'll have older adults come in and they'll be complaining. Dizziness is a big complaint, and they'll identify that it's just a hydration or nutrition issue. So it's a really important topic, and staying hydrated supports circulation, it supports digestion. So as we go through this presentation, you'll see that we are emphasizing fiber, if we remember back to one of those nutrients of concern, and protein as nutrition solutions for older adults, which makes hydration even more important, because when increasing fiber, you also need to increase your fluid intake. And about 95% of the population isn't meeting their fiber recommendations. So that's those two things should go hand in hand. And so just thinking about hydration and dairy's role and milk's role in supporting hydration. Next slide. So what makes this even more interesting, now we're going from milk, when we go through this milk matrix transformation through fermentation and heat and other ripening processes, when we are creating cheese and yogurt, these foods, the yogurt and cheese, will have their own unique nutritional and physical matrix. They contain bacteria, and they have this process produces additional bioactive compounds, which promote growth and beneficial bacteria in the gut, which Anjali will talk a little bit more about in the next few slides. But just this level of processing that we see in here, the transforming of the milk matrix, can actually enhance the nutritional contribution of the food, which we will get into in the next few slides. Next slide. So now that I gave you a little background on the shift in kind of this in nutrition science from focusing on isolated nutrients to looking at whole foods, we're going to look at the functional health benefits of including dairy in nutritious dietary patterns as they relate to managing chronic conditions, bone and muscle maintenance, gut health, and brain health. And if you recall from the poll that we did in the beginning, these functional health benefits are things that adults are interested in, and many people don't make the connection or consider nutrition's role in supporting these functional health outcomes. So we're going to do another poll, and while we're launching the poll, I'm just going to do a quick, like, what is inflammation? So chronic inflammation is a longer-term immune response that can be weeks or years, and unlike acute inflammation, chronic inflammation can harm tissues. It contributes to heart disease, diabetes, arthritis, cancer, and impaired immune function. So it's kind of the body's defense system that's stuck on high alert. So we have dairy foods cause inflammation. Is this true or false? Okay, you can go ahead and share the results. So we have 23% of people think it's true, 77% think it's false. So dairy foods in the diet are not associated with higher levels of inflammation. Multiple systematic reviews and meta-analysis, so that's just taking all of the kind of research and pulling it together, suggests that dairy foods are not inflammatory and may exhibit anti-inflammatory effects. And it was on a validated inflammation scoring system, found that both high-fat and low-fat dairy foods had anti-inflammatory scores. So this is a myth busted. Next slide. Oh, did we share the results? I guess I said the results, but we did.
You shared. We shared.
Okay, good.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good myth or misinformation. Like, thank you for myth busting that, because even for me, I wasn't sure on what the data was saying. So it was sort of, I was actually very surprised by what the data said, even though, there's a lot out there on that myth. So thank you for busting that for us. Dairy actually is associated, milk and dairy both are associated with a neutral or reduced risk for some of our chronic conditions that our older adults are facing or concerned about: overweight or obesity, hypertension, cardiovascular disease, and type 2 diabetes, to name a few. And reducing our risk and management of these chronic conditions do remain a public health priority. And as I said, milk and dairy may play a role in that. So speaking of, the next slide, you can see here that one of the, I think this was back in 2023 or 2024. I don't know what year it is anymore, but it was a couple of years ago when there was enough data to have a qualified health claim around dairy, yogurt specifically, I should say, and type 2 diabetes risk. So the qualified health claim says eating yogurt regularly, at least 2 cups a day per week, sorry, not a day, per week, or 3 servings per week may reduce your risk of type 2 diabetes according to limited scientific evidence. So of course it is limited scientific evidence, but it was enough for the FDA to issue a qualified health claim for yogurt to use. An authorized health claim, on the other hand, so there's a lot of data, enough data to make this claim: adequate calcium and vitamin D as part of a healthful diet, along with physical activity, may reduce the risk of osteoporosis in later life. So of course, we can't just eat these nutrients in isolation. It's part of a whole healthy diet. Betsy, thank you for clarifying the matrix, or at least speaking to the matrix. It's about eating these nutrients within the matrix, along part of a healthful diet with physical activity, and that may reduce your risk of osteoporosis in later life. So these are just some claims to look out for and educate on for if you're in that position too. And so they don't know, they don't know, it's limited evidence. When I was looking at the claim and how it came to be, they don't actually know the mechanism. You can advance. They didn't know the mechanism. And one of the things that that the science was pointing to was maybe it could be the probiotic in the yogurt. But they don't know for sure. So we were touching on nurturing our gut with food. And so the gut microbiome is an important factor in chronic conditions. It undergoes significant changes to age due to shifts in eating habits, the medications, our lifestyle, which can have an impact on our health. However, interventions to improve our gut microbiome composition in older and frail adults appear to be positive and have lasting effects, including a variety of foods and eating patterns leading to a more diverse gut microbiome, which makes it better equipped to handle age-related disruptions. However, over the past 50 years, dietary variety has declined, and eliminating either animal or plant foods can further reduce that gut diversity. So with the next slide, we're defining what I mean by probiotics. Probiotics are, the definition is probiotics are live microorganisms that, when administered in adequate amounts, confer a health benefit on the host. Prebiotics are types of soluble fiber that our bodies can't digest, but feed the good bacteria, those probiotics, in the gut, and they help healthy microbes grow and stay active. So there is a place for both prebiotics and probiotics for a healthy gut microbiome. Next slide. And you can see, within our nutrition solutions that there are many prebiotics that feed the probiotics in our plants. And so veggies and fruit, lentils, beans, nuts, and oats all have prebiotic fibers that will feed those probiotics. Even lactose, the natural sugar in dairy, can act as a prebiotic for some beneficial bacteria. So together they work to support gut health. Next slide, in addition to the probiotics, we have fermented dairy, and those are also very beneficial to support gut health. They may reduce inflammation and improve immunity, may reduce the risk of those chronic conditions we looked at earlier, and may actually also reduce the risk of cognitive decline. So it's both fermented foods and probiotics, and cheese is a fermented food. So dairy can be very much part of the gut health story.
All right, so the healthy gut can also support bone health. So we always think of like our gut health, like people might have start hearing about like the gut brain axis, but there's also like a bone gut axis. So what happens is that in the fermentation process, how the gut supports bone health. So it helps create improve nutrient absorption by creating metabolites. So it produces short chain fatty acids that help stimulate the intestinal absorption of different nutrients like calcium and magnesium. And so that's, those are really important nutrients for bone health. And so this kind of just shows that there can be targeted nutrition solutions to kind of support gut health. And that can be by incorporating these prebiotics, probiotics, and fermented dairy as well. So it's not only the calcium and the vitamin D and potassium and some of these other nutrients we always think of to support bone health, but it can also, having a healthy gut also can support that bone health as well. And this is really important because osteoporosis and sarcopenia are really impact older adults quite a bit. 20%, 27% of women age 65 and older experience osteoporosis. And then sarcopenia, which is age-related muscle loss, starts around between 30 and 40 years old, which is a little bit earlier, I think, than most of us would think it starts to happen. And this can be exacerbated or made worse with malnutrition or inactivity, low protein intake, and obesity, which can, really impact quality of life and daily living. Protein needs for older adults, particularly those with chronic conditions, often require higher protein intake. But we know that about 40% of US older adults consume less than is recommended. So dairy is a solution. It's a high quality, complete protein that's affordable and convenient and easy to prepare. And then just wanted to kind of point out that although we're really focusing on the nutrition solutions and dairy specifically in this conversation, physical activity and strength training not only supports bone and muscle health, but also all of the other kind of functional health benefits that we're talking about, mental and cognition, as well as gut health too. So physical activity is something we're not focusing on today, but is a very important aspect to consider as well in connection with nutrition. Next slide. So again, just on these slides, we're trying to really put forward a food forward approach, just pulling some key examples of, sources of calcium and vitamin D. And you'll see this theme that milk and dairy fall into several of the categories to support bone and muscle health, as well as some other foods. Back to you, Anjali.
Yes, I'm like, oh, salmon sounds good tonight. Sorry, I'm making my dinner plans while looking at these slides. The brain health is also another aspect that a lot of our older adults are concerned, or not concerned, but want to keep up with and work on. So cognitive decline is something that is amongst older adults. And it involves memory, concentration, and other brain functions beyond a normal aging. And it can range from mild cognitive impairment, or MCI, to severe dementia affecting our daily activities. So one of the nutrient solutions that, and you can, next slide, please. One of the nutrient solutions that dairy can offer, and other foods on this list you can see, is B12. And that is a nutrient of consideration for older adults, as B12 is harder to absorb. And so B12 is found in animal sources or animal byproducts or fortified cereal and nutritional yeast, as you can see on this slide. And so that is a nutrient that can definitely benefit our outcomes for brain health, as well as, and next slide, calcium and vitamin D, which we've already spoken to for bone health, also have impact on our brain health. Protein, we've also, again, you'll see common themes within, different chronic conditions, but the same nutrients apply. So protein, specifically, I've highlighted here because we've already talked about calcium and vitamin D and protein, but I do want to point out that with protein, we have two neurotransmitters that milk and dairy, sorry, and that's tryptophan, and you can see that with the image with the brain. And so that's a essential amino acid that's crucial for brain function, and it's sole precursor to a neurotransmitter called serotonin, which regulates mood, appetite, sleep, and cognition. And that neurotransmitter kind of helps with the brain gut axis, where the gut bacteria can metabolize tryptophan and into other compounds that affect the host's immune system and brain function. And then we have tyrosine, which is also found in dairy foods and milk, and also in meat, nuts, and beans. And it's a building block for the neurotransmitter dopamine. So you can see that in the synapse on the in the other image there. And so those are that neurotransmitter is essential for functions like food, focus, mood, and our stress response. and adequate tyrosine intake is associated with better cognitive performance overall. And on the slide, you'll also see omega-3 fatty acids, choline, and glutathione. And Bessie will speak to a little bit of the research found on that antioxidant glutathione.
Yeah, so nutrition is increasingly kind of being recognized and researched for its role in preventing cognitive decline. It's really fascinating. The findings are not conclusive, but there is more and more research coming out on, nutrition's role, including dairy's role in cognitive decline. And so there's research on fermented products like yogurt and cheese, which we've talked about already, but they may support cognitive function in older adults. It's the components inside of them that she mentioned, protein, the bioactive peptides, probiotics as well. And then other research suggests that consuming 3 servings of milk per day may elevate glutathione levels, which is an antioxidant that helps reduce oxidative stress in the brain. And then another study, these are just like kind of a sampling, but just wanted to kind of be able to speak to kind of dairy's role in cognition. But another study said that even small amounts of dairy, 1 to 2 servings per month, which is much lower than the recommended amount, have been associated with a lower risk of developing dementia in older adults compared to non-consumers. So it's just really interesting, and definitely more research is needed to really make any sort of conclusive findings. But this just kind of indicates that incorporating dairy foods into the diet can play a supportive role in brain health throughout adulthood. All right, so we've been talking a lot about dairy and its role in these functional health benefits. So now kind of the question is how many servings of dairy is recommended per day? All right, you can go ahead and share the results. Looks like 93% say 3 servings, which is correct. So that is correct. Next slide. So dairy foods continue to be recognized as part of eating patterns. The dietary guidelines for Americans recommend 3 servings. Mediterranean diet, which has been a very well-researched diet on improving health outcomes, recommends 2.5. The DASH diet, which is the dietary approaches to stop hypertension, recommends 2 to 3 servings. So it just can really play a supportive role in diet, not only for the health benefits, but also adding nutrition, flavor, and texture to different dietary patterns that can meet people's unique needs.
And when we think about the recommendations, we can always step outside of a pattern or a rigid way of, the Mediterranean diet is very evidence-based, but in my community kitchen for older adults, I've sort of had to take the science and then apply it to the cultural diversity in my classroom, where again, we can build autonomy and competence and relatedness, like in the self-determination theory, to foster that motivation for my students and keep that behavior change going. But mostly, I would say in my kitchen, it's about social health and that collective effervescence and joy that eating brings. Bessie, I love that you talk about the matrix. You talked about the matrix, a really good setup, because nutritionism is something that it's a paradigm that a lot of us live in. Nutritionism, it assumes that it is the scientifically identified nutrients in food that determine the value of that food in the diet. And it's kind of one of those reductionist ways of thinking about food that assumes the whole point of eating is just to maintain health. But we know that food is so much more than that. And so in my practice, we talk about cultural foodways and how dairy fits into many cultural foodways around the globe. Healthy eating embraces individual preferences, cultures, traditions, also budget, which we sort of identified affordability of dairy as being a barrier or a facilitator. There is a wide variety of dairy that meets unique nutritional needs and preferences. So they can be part of your food traditions, identity, belonging, joy, eating, connections. And so I just this is a lot of this is a, these are a lot of pictures. I'm from Gujarat, which is a state in India that is vegetarian. It's a vegetarian state. And so dairy is a huge important part of every meal for us in terms of complete protein. It has the complete protein. It's a very important staple in every single meal that we have, whether it's yogurt or curry, which is a savory yogurt, or chas or lassi, maybe that's more familiar, yogurt drink. It's very much part of every meal. It has a functional purpose, but it also has a cooling effect for spiciness. So just learning more and more about cultural eating patterns and how those recommendations can fit in and empower the cultures in doing and eating in ways that connect them to their culture and identity can be really powerful in those sustainable behavior change conversation that we had earlier. Next slide.
So, wow, that's amazing amount of pictures of cultural foods, and we're going to talk about the cultural relevance and how to maybe humanize the nutrition education. And some of our viewers are actually educators or registered dietitians or nutrition educators. So we're going to just focus on humanizing the nutrition education part of it. So when we think about nourishing healthy eating among our aging or older adults, it's not just about nutrients. It's about people. It's about stories, it's about living experiences that they've had. So our nutrition education should be relatable, engaging, and it's tailored to them. So it's always meeting where the older adults or aging adults where they're at. So we always want to ask what's meaningful to them? What foods do they connect with? Because if there is no education, it's not going to stick if it doesn't feel personal or relevant for them. So always consider the cultural context and nuances. So the preferences, their upbringing, their cultural beliefs, it shapes what means healthy or comforting to them. So using the iceberg theory of culture, we see on the surface just a small part of what influences food choices for all of our older adults or even for everyone. So we just want to make sure we're listening to understand the diverse perspectives. It builds trust. So instead of always trying to correct and judge, we always want to ask these opening questions and really listen. It builds relatedness. So it's one of the pillars that we see in the self-determination theory that we discussed earlier. So again, food is connected deeply into the identity and belonging and memory for many people, especially for anyone like, for us here, food connects us to our families, it connects us to our communities, it connects us to our traditions. So some of our favorite meals might represent something that maybe your mom or your dad made for you when you were sick, or maybe a memory that you had when you're in your childhood. See, food is more than just nutrients. It's about fuel and it's about belief, the identity that we have behind those each bite. So I know I'm a little biased about the Manchurian diet. I went to school, studied it. But, not everyone's gonna align with it, but our job as nutrition educators or dietitians is to adapt those principles and not impose them, but to make sure that each person's plan reflects that story for them. So when you see in the picture on the right side, that's where I have a picture of a food demonstration that we have for our older adults or aging adults in my work. So this is our tasting kitchen. It's one of the two things that we do from my end that we do. We invite our residents or our older adult community to be able to try certain things. So first things first, I'd like to talk about the social gathering. So we always talk about the happy hour for the RDs. So in conjugal meal settings, the social connection is just as important as the nutrients from my perspective, creating spaces, conversations about food, what it means, and how it brings joy helps foster that belonging for our aging and older adults. So also, there was a question that was brought up to me about during these taste kitchens, is that how do I help myself feel hungry? And there's often times when a social gathering, it helps encourage our aging adults to consume foods. And sometimes when you're eating alone, it's not really encouraging. So if you see someone that's not really eating as much, I think it's really important to encourage and invite them to a meal to help and encourage them to eat better for them. And then in regards to the food demonstration, the one that you see here, a lot of older adults tell me, don't tell me what to do. You know, I've lived a really good life. I lived a long life. And yes, they are right. And we want to value their autonomy. So food demos can show a very unique and new, enjoyable way to include dairy. So a lot of people have those fears, those barriers that they feel towards dairy. You want to we always try like a cheese or a type of yogurt for them, including with like nuts and seeds to help them kind of feel familiar rather than restrictive for them. So this is help builds comfort and agency. So like I said earlier, it just helps them rediscover and enjoyment while respecting their preferences that have it during the food demo. So just in closing for this slide here, just sharing real foods, implementing humanized nutrition education, not just fuels the body, but it nourishes connection, the dignity, and provides social and emotional nourishment for our aging adults or older adults. So the next slide. So now talking about practicing cultural humility. So cultural humility is the mindset we allow us to humanize our practice. It's not just a skill that you master, but a long commitment to reflection and respect. So on the bottom that you see the link right there, as Jaeger and Wu describes, cultural humility starts with self-evaluation and self-critique. Before we learn someone else's culture, we need to reflect on our own biases, our own assumptions, our own default approaches to healthy eating. You know, even for me, I'm a brand new RD. I've been a dietitian for 5 years since October 30th. It's a lot of things are implementing and saying that they need to follow this, they need to do that, but we need to kind of eliminate and kind of self-reflect towards when we come to another a person and putting and imposing those approaches to them, how we feel is healthy for us and not for them too. So it just means honoring everyone's belief and customs and values. So entering the relationship not as an authority figure, but as someone that authority figure, not just to tell them what to eat, my apologies, but as a person to help them explore what health looks like through their lens. So for older adults, cultural humility helps us understand how culture shapes not just our food choices, but it provides comfort, independency, and trust. So many older adults, like for my mom and my dad, they've survived food insecurity, immigration, and personal loss, and some of their choices mean carry meaning to them. So we want to acknowledge that and create space for them for healing and partnership, and make it realistic. So you want to make health be aligned with identity and access and traditions. Otherwise, it won't survive or won't last as long. Okay. Just talking about the culture, how dairy means a lot to me. Even when I think about older adults, they always tell me that dairy it reminds them of memories, like the warm milk, the cheese with bread, toli, or the paneer. Like other people avoid it, but it's practicing that cultural humility means that we listen first and then create solutions for them. So instead of saying that they have to eat 5 servings, we always want to make sure what foods you feel strong or remind you of home. Those are the kind of approaches that I do try to reshape for my questions. Or how do you want to explore dairy or lactose-free options that fit your meals and comfort? So this helps shift from prescribing to partnership, to from an expert to a collaborator. So dairy comes in many forms, like Ajali said, fermented, traditional alternatives. if that's what fits to their cultural story, then that's perfect. We want to embrace flexibility. We want to nourish the healthy aging in a way that respects both them and the heritage that they have. So, just in closing, just lead when leading with cultural humility. Remind ourselves that nutrition is not just what's on the plate, but what's on the other side of the table. Who's sitting with us? So, aging begins with listening, honoring traditions, and supportive, diverse paths to wellness.
Thank you, Roberto. That was really, it's like just a way to like tie it all together, just talking about the kind of the nutrition and then that application, I think is so important. And then just to speak to that cultural relevance a little bit more, we do know that 30% of Latino, Black, and Asian Pacific Islander populations report having lactose intolerance. It could be sometimes even higher rates. But the research and multiple health on the multiple health benefits of dairies, the National Medical Association has their updated consensus statement on lactose intolerant and health disparities recommends that people with lactose intolerance keep dairy in their diet and opt for lactose-free dairy options. So just wanted to share this. It kind of shows the range of lactose in different dairy foods, 0 grams in lactose-free dairy milk, only 1 gram in natural cheeses, cottage cheese, and like ricotta types of cheeses has 2 to 3 grams, and then regular dairy milk has 12 grams. So you can kind of just see this continuum so that it hopefully helps think of ways to include dairy while also understanding that some people may not feel as comfortable with that full lactose version. And anytime that there's recommendations that are excluding a whole food group, there does need to be special considerations about how people fill those nutrient gaps. So yeah, in summary, you can feel confident that dairy supports nutritious and cultural eating patterns and in healthy aging. Next slide. So just really quick, Dairy Council of California is a nutrition education organization. We focus a lot on collaboration. And so as you can see here today, with the presenters, we have aligned values to elevate the health of communities. And that made this professional development webinar possible. We're excited to continue. I'm going to be working with Roberto on a health and nutrition campaign in March during National Nutrition Month. We're going to bring our mobile dairy classroom, which is where we take a real cow into the community to his independent and assisted living facility where he's a registered dietitian. We're going to also do a culinary tasting along with some nutrition education. So we just love to explore ways to collaborate to develop educational tools or publications. And there will be an opportunity in the survey, an optional opportunity to share your contact information if you would like to explore ways to work together. So we also continue to develop nutrition publication and resources. These are intended to translate the latest science, nutrition science. We also have our annual trends publication that will be available. Our 2026 publication will be available in January. And we just, through that publication, provide insight as well as the implication of what's happening in our food and health and policy and education environment. This presentation here today was based on our Healthy Eating Table publication on nurturing healthy aging, which was recently endorsed by the International Council on Active Aging. That publication also includes a nutrition education handout, which that print version will be available in 2026. So you can definitely, there's an option in the survey as well to sign up for our newsletter. And so you can be the first to order that print handout to that newsletter. And then, of course, you can access all of these resources. They're of no cost at dairycouncilofcalifornia.org. And one last poll to kind of wrap it up. And then we're going to also have a survey. So hopefully everyone sticks around. So just to get a gauge from the beginning to the end of the presentation, what's your understanding of latest evidence surrounding dairy nutrition? All right, so yes, I encourage you all to stay in touch. Here's our contact information. These slides will be shared afterwards. And then also if you can take the survey, it would be great. Just takes a couple of minutes. Just gonna also share the link to the survey in the chat if that is easier. All right, I'm gonna take a quick peek at the Q&A. We don't have any questions. We did get a lot of questions that were asked in the pre-survey for registration. And so we did try to incorporate a lot of those into the presentation. So hopefully that's why there's not a lot of questions, because we tried to answer them in the presentation. But we are at noon. Let's see, can we get this recording sent? Yes, so the recording will be the presentation slides, and some follow-up resources will be emailed to participants. See if there's any other questions popping in. All right, perfect. All right, well, thank you everyone for attending very much, and we'll make sure we send you all of the follow-up materials.